This video will show you a technique you can use in Corporate Taxprep for creating a small Excel file that you can use to create subsequent tax returns. So this would be very useful in situations where you're creating a lot of new files every year and they are for a similar part of your corporate group, and a lot of the information is the same as one of your principal tax return files. So what we're going to do is we're going to export the information that we want to use for our new files into an Excel spreadsheet, and then we can use that Excel spreadsheet to import into the new files. So the first thing you need is a data file that contains the information that you want to have in your new files. This can either be an existing file that you have, and most likely that would be the case, or you can even just create a new one and enter in the information that you want for your, I like to call it model return template. And if you're going to do that, then actually the process is to some extent a little bit simpler, because you're just going to export out everything that's in that file. But in most cases you're probably working with an existing file. So what we need to do is identify what data in this file we want to use for creating our subsequent files. So there's a couple different ways to do this, and it depends on whether or not most of the data in the file will be the same, or just a limited amount of data in the file will be the same. In my case here, I'm going to say that just a limited amount of data will be the same. And what I want to do in either case is identify either what data I want to use from this file to create the new ones, or what data do I want to exclude. So let's start with the first example of what data do I want to use or include. In either case, you're going to use a function in the program called review marks. If you haven't used this before, it's available on the edit menu, and it's also available on the advanced toolbar. And you simply select a review mark. And to make this go a little bit faster, you can use something we call review mode. And review mode allows you to change the pointer that you're using and successively just click to put that review mark on multiple cells. So we're going to do that, and if I'm going to identify the files that I want to include, I visually like to use the check mark. So I'm going to do that. And now I'm going to change to review mode, so I just click on review mode, and now you'll see that my pointer has changed. It's got a little pen nib on it, and it's got a little check mark beside it. So now what will happen is, as I check the data that I want, all I have to do is click. So I'm doing a single click. Now if you're creating a new file, you normally wouldn't click anything that would be calculated, because then when you go to import, the program's going to ask you, do you want to override? I will, however, click some of the data here that is carried forward. I may not also need to click the taxation year end, for example, because the program, when you create a new file, puts in a default taxation year end, and you can even control that from the prepare profile. So I'm not going to worry about that. I'm going to tick some of these questions here. And when you put it in review mode, it's actually fairly straightforward. Now in this case, I'm thinking it's probably the date of incorporation may vary from one to another, so I'm not going to put that one in. Some of these questions are going to be defaulted anyway when you create a new file, but we'll just click them. So I'm going to assume that the business number, of course, is going to be different, so I'm not going to click that. And let's just click the type of corp. And we'll do a few more of these, and I think you can get the idea. Let me just scroll down to the section on the address, because that may be the part that is most likely to be consistent. And again, I'm not going to bother with the cells that are calculated from above. And my file here is a little bit of a mixture of French and English, but the principle is the same. And I think that's probably, oh no, we've got our signing officer, of course. So let me just again click some of this. And that's probably it. So there may be, of course, data in other forms as well, 106, 1134, other things that you want to carry forward. But the same principle applies. So I can now go to another form. And I'm not sure if I have any data on the 106, and I do have a little bit. Okay, so let's go into the 106, and we'll click off a little bit of that as well. So same idea. And I realized I probably didn't do the NAICS code in the ID. That would also be that could be consistent. So you get the idea here. Once I have identified the cells that I want to export, if you want to just verify them, in Taxprep you have a command called Express. And Express allows you to see the data that's been entered into the return, but it also has a number of different filters, and one of those is to see all the cells with, it's called first review, but basically it's cells that have a check mark beside them. So that if you want to see the cells, I'm just going to space this a little bit differently so it's a little bit easier to see. This is all the data that I have checked off that's going to be imported. So if you come in and you look at any of this and say, you know what, that's not any of these pieces of information is not necessarily what I want to export into my new files, I could just click again and that would remove the check mark from there. So when you've got your pointer in review mode, it's a toggle. If you click, if you've got a check mark on and you click, it removes it, and you can just click again to put it on. Okay. So once you're happy with the data that you've identified, you're going to be exporting it. And that is done through the file command, and it's called export tax return. And then you get this dialog box coming up. If it doesn't already default to it, which it may not because it's usually what you've last picked, and in my case it had been Excel, I would normally recommend you change from CSV, which is comma separated value, to Excel. If you do want to manipulate the data in the Excel file, it's a little bit easier than if it's comma separated, which it will work in Excel, but this is just a little bit, it saves you a step. Okay. And then the Express filter. If you had checked the data in Express, then the Express filter here will default to the last setting that you used in Express, the last filter. If you hadn't done that step of checking the data, which is fine, then click in Express filters, and what you want is to choose the filter that says cells with review marks. So what we're doing in effect is we're choosing from within all of the data entered in the file, we're choosing which items we're going to be using for creating subsequent returns. And click OK. And then click OK to create the Excel file. We'll just give it a name. So I'm going to call this new file data, and save. And this dialog box that comes up just asks you, do you want to open the exported file with a program that recognizes the file format? If you click yes on that, then it will just open up Excel and you'll be able to see it. We'll just do that, but you don't need to do this step. But I will show you what it should look like, just in case if you come in you're wondering. It's a little intimidating. The first column is the identifier in Taxprep as to where that data goes or came from. The second one is the current year value, the third one is the prior year value, and the fourth one is the actual description. But in this process you don't actually need to use Excel at all, so I wouldn't be overly concerned with looking at that. And then you're going to create the new file. So rather than do a save as, go File New. You create a new file, and you don't need Express open, it just happens to be open still in my file here. And then you're going to go Import Data, Excel Workbook. Choose the file that you just created. In your case, you may only have one Excel spreadsheet sitting in your export folder anyway. Click Open, and the program's going to ask you, do you want to import data into the active return? Say yes. So it's important to create the new file first and then import it in. If everything's good, you should say operation completed successfully. Depending on what you've selected, it is possible that if you have been overriding certain fields in your file and you need to override them again in your new file, the program there'll also be a dialog box that comes up that asks you, do you want to override? So if that was a conscious decision on your part to override these amounts and you need to override it in the new one, say yes to that. If you just pick something accidentally that was a calculated cell and you didn't mean to pick something that would need to be overridden, then just say no to that. In my case, I only picked input cells, so I didn't get that dialog box. And click close. And now what you have is, and if you want to see what you actually brought in, you can go cells imported. And this will show you everything that you brought into the file. And if I look up above, so it defaults to the taxation year that Taxprep normally assigns. It brought in the jurisdiction, brought in the type of corp, and set up my certification, my head office address, my certification, and then if we go to the 106, we have some information on the 106 setup as well. Okay. Now, I also mentioned that you, as an alternative, if most of the data in the file is not going to be applicable, then there's another way to do it. So I'm just going to clear off those review marks. So that the command I just used just took off all the review marks, and I'll show you another way to do it. In this case, what it is that we're going to take all of the data. We're just going to click off the parts we don't want to take. So in that case, just to make it a little visually clearer, I would probably use the X, and then I'll remember that this is information I don't want to export. So let's say it's almost everything except for the I don't even need the Ontario MGS anymore, the Quebec and the federal account numbers, and the name of the corp, and maybe there's one or two other things that maybe there's one name in the, let's look down here. Okay, let's say that this contact person's a little bit different, so you get the idea. So what we're going to do here is export out everything except for what I've marked, which is a slightly different choice when you're doing the exporting. And again, I can verify this data first if I want to. So it's going to be everything except for these items. If I really want to see exactly what's going to be exported, I can do something called combine, which is essentially what I'm going to do in a second to export anyway. And what this is allows me to be more specific about exactly what I want to see. So I want to see all the data entered this year, and click details, and except for cells with an error mark. Now, error mark is just kind of a long-winded way of saying a check, an X beside them. So all data entered this year, and over on the right-hand side it says data excluded from the grid, and I've chosen cells with error mark. So it will be all data entered this year, excluding cells with an error mark. And click OK. And this is basically a list of what you're going to be exported. Now, you can see here that some of these have been overridden. So in fact, we'll get to see. I'll leave it that way, and then you'll see that dialog box that comes up. And once you're happy with that, again, you can change it just by putting an X on something that you don't want to include. And then we'll go to, again, export tax return. And because I had already defined what I was looking at and what I want to export in Express, it's already set up for me here. But if I hadn't done that step, if I hadn't looked at it in Express first, I could click Express Filters. You see it's exactly the same dialog box. I want it to say data entered this year, and excluding cells with error marks. Okay, so it's everything but what I have marked. And OK. And I'll just call this new file data number 2. And the process from here is the same. It's just that there was two different ways there of identifying what data you wanted to export. And you don't really need to see Excel in this case, so I'll just click No and create my new file. So File New. And again, import data from Excel. Point to the file, click Open. Do you want to import into the active return? Yes. Now here is where it asks me about overriding. So if it was a conscious decision to override, for example, I think one of them was selecting the return for e-file, you can say yes. Now, the one thing that's a little bit tricky here is that the value that's shown is the internal cell ID, so it might not be that it wouldn't be that clear as to what this was. In this case, I can tell that it's probably something on schedule 1. So I think I'm just going to say yes to all, and I can always clean it up afterwards because I can see a list of everything that's been overridden. So I'll just say yes. And a couple of the cells that I was trying to import into were protected, so we didn't import in there. And if I want to see anything that had been overridden, I have that option again in Express, and it shows me all the overrides. So maybe some of those cells were not things I actually wanted to have in there. Let me just turn off my review mark. I just click again on review mode to turn off my review marks, go back to a normal kind of pointer. And if any of those were items I really didn't want to push through, for example, this one is my add back of SR and ED, I just go Control U to remove those overrides. And so there may have only been a couple that I actually did want to override. Okay, and then you save the file. So those are two different techniques that you have for taking data from one file and creating brand new files out of it. And when you create a brand new file, of course, you don't have to worry about whether your prior year history makes sense or not. You can keep going with that Excel file for future versions as well. If new cells are added to the program or cells removed, you may have to adjust it a little bit, but generally speaking, you should be able to keep going with that. So I hope that you will find that helpful in creating your additional new files.